Millionaire leaves pregnant wife for mistress, but she was hiding a secret that changes everything. In a quiet suburb of Charleston, the wealthy magnate James Blackwood seemed to have it all: a thriving business empire, a palatial home, and a beautiful wife named Caroline. Yet beneath the shimmering veneer of success lay a marriage teetering on the brink. In a single night, James shattered the illusion of their once perfect union when he confessed he was leaving Caroline for a stunning woman named Vanessa, his longtime mistress. Broken-hearted and blindsided, Caroline braced herself for the fallout. Little did James know, however, that Vanessa was harboring a shocking secret, a hidden truth that would upend all their lives forever. Caroline Montgomery Blackwood was born into a modest family in Greenville, South Carolina. She was the daughter of a high school teacher and a retired nurse, both of whom instilled in her the values of compassion, integrity, and resilience. She carried these traits with her when she moved to Charleston in her early 20s, determined to make something of herself. That was when she first met James Blackwood, a man whose very presence could light up a room with sheer confidence. He was older, already wealthy from a series of real estate ventures that propelled him to local fame, and possessed a magnetic charm that drew Caroline in from the start. At the beginning of their relationship, Caroline found James's ambition intoxicating. He had a way of making the impossible seem easy, dreaming aloud of building an empire that would rival the biggest names in the country. In return, James found Caroline's warm spirit and unwavering support a welcome refuge from the cutthroat negotiations and corporate posturing he faced every day. They fit together like two puzzle pieces, one bold and visionary, the other empathetic and steadying. The synergy of their union was undeniable, and it didn't take long for them to marry in a lavish ceremony overlooking the harbor. Life after the wedding was a whirlwind of business deals and social galas. Caroline found herself the graceful hostess of James's many parties, forging connections with the city's elite. Yet beneath the glitter, she couldn't help but notice the toll that James's never-ending aspirations placed on their relationship. He traveled often. He came home later and later, or sometimes not at all. When Caroline confronted him, James would dismiss her concerns with a reassuring smile, telling her that every sacrifice was for their future. And for a while, that answer worked. Caroline trusted him, loved him enough to let her doubts remain unvoiced. Things began to shift when Caroline suspected James was becoming restless, his interest drifting. He started showing more signs of dissatisfaction at home, small criticisms, a certain impatience when she spoke about her day, a reluctance to talk about the future unless it involved business. Then there was his phone, which he guarded with an intensity that made Caroline's stomach churn with suspicion. Late-night texts, hushed phone calls, business trips extended for days without explanation, her mind buzzed with possibilities, each darker than the last. Caroline tried to talk to him, but each conversation ended in evasion. James would deflect with claims of new clients or last-minute negotiations that absolutely couldn't wait. He grew distant, almost cold, as if home life had lost its luster for him. In many ways, he was already gone before the confession, before the heartbreak, before the raw devastation that was about to unfold. Caroline never imagined that a few hours later, on a night that began like any other, James would walk through their ornate front doors, take her trembling hands in his, and utter those fateful words, "I'm leaving you." The initial shock left Caroline speechless. Her palms went clammy, her heart thundered against her ribs, and she felt an inexplicable cold creep into her bones. James's voice echoed in her ears, "I'm leaving you," but the words didn't quite sink in. She stared at him, searching for the gentleness she once loved, hoping to find some trace of remorse or doubt. Instead, she saw only steely resolve, He explained he'd fallen in love with another woman, Vanessa Carter, and though he had planned a more gentle revelation, he couldn't stomach living the lie any longer. Caroline wished she could put a face to this name Vanessa. The only clues she had were scattered comments James once made about a brilliant marketing consultant he'd hired to revamp his real estate firm's public image. Caroline recalled one particular evening at a corporate gala when James introduced her to Vanessa. At the time, the name was fleeting, overshadowed by a swirl of introductions. Vanessa was a tall woman with striking features, honey brown hair swept into a sophisticated chignon, piercing grey eyes, and a captivating confidence. Caroline remembered her feeling slightly uneasy that night, but she dismissed it as mere self-consciousness. Now, all the pieces fit together in a puzzle that only spelled betrayal. Although she was crushed, Caroline found a glimmer of courage deep within. The next morning, she hired a private investigator named Mark Stevenson, a seasoned professional recommended by a friend who had gone through a similarly devastating divorce. If James was leaving, Caroline wanted to know what she was up against. Part of her felt guilty for stooping to secrecy, but she told herself this was self-preservation. After all, James had shattered their vows. The least she could do was protect herself. As Mark started digging, Caroline pored over bank statements and financial records. She discovered that James had been funneling money into a secret account for months, perhaps even years. She found suspicious cash withdrawals, hotel receipts, and flamboyant purchases she never saw brought into the home. A swirl of questions crowded her mind. Was their entire marriage a sham? How long had James been planning this exit? The house was eerily silent in his absence. She wandered from room to room, occasionally finding reminders of him, a tie slung over the back of a chair, a nearly empty bottle of his cologne in the master bathroom. The smell of him lingered in the air. Every detail was laced with heartbreak, but more than anything, it infuriated her. She promised herself that she wouldn't let him walk away scot-free if that was indeed what he was planning. Soon, Mark emailed her a hefty file. It contained photographs of James and Vanessa at an upscale restaurant, or stepping out of a black limo, or holding hands at a weekend getaway in Hilton Head. The timestamps showed their rendezvous going back nearly 8 months. Caroline stared at the images until her eyes burned. There, in front of her, was incontrovertible proof of her husband's betrayal. Yet for all its painful clarity, it was only the beginning. Unknown to both James and Caroline, Vanessa Carter had her own buried truths, ones that would force them all to confront a reality more shocking than anything they had imagined. While Caroline grappled with the remnants of her life, James was riding the wave of his newfound freedom, reveling in Vanessa's affections. He relocated to a penthouse suite at the Renaissance Hotel, offering panoramic views of Charleston's historic harbor. The move was as much about convenience as it was about flaunting his wealth. He had no intention of hiding his affair any longer. The tabloids got wind of it, running stories with titles like "Real Estate Mogul James Blackwood Splits from Wife," accompanied by speculative commentary on who the mysterious mistress might be. For her part, Vanessa played the role of supportive partner, helping James pivot his real estate brand into new territory. With her marketing expertise, they positioned his firm for explosive growth across the southeastern region. They were photographed at high society functions, arms intertwined, the glimmer of success sparking in their eyes. James felt invincible. He had money, influence, and a mesmerizing woman on his arm. In his mind, the world was at his feet. Yet, behind Vanessa's polished exterior lingered an anxiety she couldn't shake. She spent hours on the phone with someone whose number she never saved under a real name, always stepping out on the terrace to ensure James wouldn't overhear. Sometimes, in the hush of early morning, she would break down in silent tears. James noticed the occasional puffiness around her eyes, but chalked it up to the stress of launching his new marketing campaign. The truth was, that Vanessa was living a double life, a precarious balancing act that threatened to collapse under the slightest pressure. In a hushed meeting at a coffee shop outside the city, Vanessa met with a man named Thomas Carlyle. He was not a business associate, not a relative. He was, in fact, her husband. Their marriage was a secret she had kept from James from the very beginning. Thomas was no millionaire. He was a school administrator in Charlotte, leading a quiet, unassuming life. Their relationship had deteriorated in the past year, especially after Vanessa took on James as a client and frequently traveled between Charlotte and Charleston. Thomas demanded explanations. "When are you coming back? Are we even going to salvage what's left of us?" In desperation, he told her he would file for a legal separation if she didn't end whatever fling she was having. But Vanessa didn't give him a straight answer. Instead, she pleaded for time to solidify her position in James's life, time to secure a windfall that would change her future forever. Thomas was torn between anger and lingering affection. He had never seen his wife so fixated on someone else. Vanessa tried to ease his mind by painting a rosy picture. "I'm doing this for us, for our future," she insisted. But the words rang hollow. She was playing a dangerous game, torn between a stable past and the promise of an extravagant future. With every day that passed, the tension mounted, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her secrets erupted to the surface. Caroline had initially thought that once James left, her heartbreak would be the hardest challenge to face. But the endless legal obstacles soon overshadowed her grief. The divorce proceedings commenced at a furious pace. James's legal team moved swiftly, aiming for a rapid settlement that seemed designed to corner Caroline into an unfavorable deal. They proposed a lump sum payment with strict conditions, including gag orders that would prevent Caroline from discussing the affair publicly. It was a classic power play, silence in exchange for money. Yet Caroline wasn't alone. She had enlisted the services of an astute divorce attorney, Beatrice Langston, known for her fierce advocacy in high-stakes cases. Beatrice advised Caroline that patience was the key. They would not accept any settlement that undermined Caroline's rights, especially after such a betrayal. With Mark Stevenson's investigation steadily unveiling more evidence of James's financial manipulations, Caroline hoped to secure a fair division of property, if not more, given the marital misconduct. Amid the negotiations, Caroline started receiving anonymous letters in her mailbox. The envelopes had no return address, the contents typed on plain paper. At first, she assumed they were from some reporter digging for scandalous material, but the tone was oddly empathetic. "You deserve to know the truth," read one. Another wrote, "She's not who she claims to be." There was also a photograph, a candid snapshot of Vanessa Carter in a tearful embrace with a man Caroline didn't recognize. Intrigued, she handed these letters over to Mark. If someone was trying to send her a message, she intended to follow the lead. Meanwhile, James was oblivious to the shadows forming around him. He was too busy finalizing big real estate deals to notice Vanessa's restlessness or the many calls she stepped out to make. If he ever questioned her absence, she would lean in, brush her lips against his, and promise him it was nothing but work. James, infatuated and overconfident, never doubted her story. He believed he was the apex predator in Charleston's social jungle, certain that everyone else was simply trying to catch up. But the truth was that Vanessa wasn't merely stepping out for clandestine calls with her husband Thomas. She was also in contact with someone named Olivia Pierce, an ambitious tabloid journalist who had built her career exposing the secrets of Charleston's elite. Olivia had a knack for sniffing out salacious stories, and Vanessa was offering her a gold mine on James and, potentially, on the entire Blackwood empire. If Vanessa could spin the narrative in a way that benefited her, perhaps she could secure a massive payoff from James to keep quiet about her own hidden life. The The stage was set for a perfect storm. Caroline felt more determined than ever to protect herself and uncover the full extent of James's betrayal. Vanessa was playing both sides, entangled in a web of deception that grew more complex with each passing day. And James, arrogant and unprepared, was about to find out that betrayal cuts both ways, that sometimes the betrayer becomes the betrayed. While Caroline wrestled with the remnants of her marriage, James reveled in the thrill of his newfound freedom. He had moved into a lavish penthouse suite at the Renaissance Hotel, drawn by its sweeping harbor views and social prestige. Ever since admitting he was leaving Caroline, he had immersed himself in his affair with Vanessa. Convinced he had traded up for a more dazzling future, Vanessa was more than just his lover. A master of marketing strategy, she orchestrated campaigns that elevated Blackwood Enterprises, posting updates that showcased James's leadership and their shared vision. Together, they navigated Charleston's elite circles like a power couple on the rise, cultivating an image of unshakable unity. Yet behind Vanessa's polished veneer, an unease simmered. She took phone calls in hushed tones and ended them if James approached, her voice taut with urgency. Sometimes she would gaze out from the penthouse balcony, the harbor lights reflected in her troubled eyes. James noticed her pensive moods and occasional forced smiles, but her excuses, client calls, urgent deadlines, business negotiations always seemed plausible enough. Caroline, meanwhile, struggled through an echoing home that felt emptier by the day. The silent rooms were a stark reminder of the life she had once believed invincible. Photographs of happier times only sharpened the ache of James's betrayal. Determined not to be cast aside, she sought help from her lawyer, Beatrice Langston, and a private investigator named Mark Stevenson. In the quiet hours after sunset, they pored over bank statements, payment records, and suspicious receipts that painted an unsettling picture of James's clandestine spending. Each discovery stung. Weekend getaways at charming inns, extravagant jewelry bills, high-priced dinners at exclusive restaurants. Every line item screamed of a carefully concealed affair that ran deeper than Caroline had imagined. It wasn't merely that James had found someone new, he had siphoned off resources they'd once shared, funneling them into a hidden life. If Caroline wanted justice, she needed to act decisively. For James, however, life felt triumphant. Vanessa's marketing genius had won him fresh admiration among Charleston's elite. Newspapers ran stories lauding his vision and ambition, and he hosted lavish parties that only amplified his image as a bold entrepreneur. At these events, Vanessa played the role of elegant partner to perfection, her body language radiating confidence. Together, they accepted congratulatory handshakes and toasts, never betraying a single crack in their carefully curated facade. But as soon as the spotlight dimmed, Vanessa's composure waned. Her phone would buzz, and she'd retreat to secluded corners to speak in urgent, clipped tones. Now and then, James caught snippets. "Give me more time, or I can't do that yet," hints of a second life he couldn't fully comprehend. Whenever he confronted her with mild concern, she'd redirect him with a well-timed smile or a brush of her hand against his arm, lulling him back into complacency. Caroline spent her days and nights analyzing every document Mark brought her. The deeper they dug, the more the numbers told a damning story. Thousands spent on gifts, lavish hotel stays that spanned entire weekends, and inflated consulting fees addressed to Vanessa. While these discoveries pushed Caroline toward despair, they also strengthened her resolve. She was done letting James call the shots. If he was determined to make a spectacle of her loss, she would fight back with facts. Occasionally, Caroline heard whispered rumors that Vanessa might be deceiving James as well. A friend of a friend claimed to have seen Vanessa at a high-end lounge with a man who definitely wasn't James. Another source mentioned seeing them slip into a sleek, unmarked car before driving off. Though Caroline took such stories with a grain of salt, part of her couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at the possibility. At least James might learn what it was like to be on the receiving end of betrayal. James, for his part, dismissed any hint of Vanessa's possible indiscretions. Whenever the seed of suspicion threatened to sprout, he smothered it with self-assurances that he'd chosen a brilliant, ambitious woman. If she needed secrecy for her deals or marketing strategies, so be it. He told himself he was strong enough, confident enough, to handle any challenge she threw his way. Admitting doubt would mean questioning the entire foundation of his new life. One night, the quiet hush of the penthouse was broken by James's inability to sleep. He padded across the marble floors, intending to grab a glass of water, only to find Vanessa leaning over the balcony railing, phone pressed to her ear. Pale moonlight illuminated her tense features. The moment she saw him, she ended the call, stammering about urgent business. James studied her face, a ripple of uncertainty flickering through him. But when she sank into his arms with an apologetic smile, he allowed himself to believe her. Meanwhile, Caroline took the final steps toward legal confrontation. In Beatrice's law office, the two of them laid out evidence that suggested James had diverted marital assets to Vanessa's personal accounts. Page by page, line by line, the case against James grew stronger. Caroline felt a surge of righteous anger. He hadn't just broken her trust, he had attempted to undermine her financial security. If James thought he could discard her without consequences, he would soon realize how mistaken he was. Despite their differences, James and Caroline were both on converging paths, each propelled by forces they barely understood. James clung to illusions of Vanessa's loyalty, forging forward with grand business plans. Caroline, armed with mounting evidence, prepared for the day she would demand her due. And Vanessa herself loomed as a wild card, her secret phone calls and mysterious behavior threatening to unspool the narrative. Both James and Caroline believed they were living. In quieter moments, even James felt the faint tug of apprehension. He had staked everything on Vanessa, his heart, his reputation, his marriage. Could it be that he had misjudged her? The thought formed like a shadow in the back of his mind, swiftly dismissed before it could grow. He was James Blackwood, a man who prided himself on making the right moves. Doubting Vanessa would mean doubting himself. But storms rarely announce themselves gently. The layers of deceit that had been woven into James's flashy new life would not remain hidden forever. While Charleston's gleaming skyline offered a sense of continuity and grace, the undercurrent of secrets ran too strong to be contained. Each day brought the players in this twisted drama closer to a reckoning none of them could avoid. For Caroline, the battle lines were clear: stand firm, present the evidence, and refuse to be silenced by shame. For James, the future shimmered with promise, so long as he refused to look behind the curtain of Vanessa's perfect facade. And for Vanessa, juggling her various intrigues required increasingly careful maneuvers, lest the entire enterprise collapse under the weight of her own duplicity. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would test their resolve, expose their vulnerabilities, and determine the fate of all three. When the truth finally emerged, it would shatter more than one illusion and forever reshape the landscape of James and Caroline's once shared world. Their choices had led them here. Now they had to face the consequences. Over the following weeks, the tension between James and Caroline escalated as divorce proceedings ground on. Beatrice Langston, Caroline's lawyer, was unrelenting, demanding full disclosure of James's assets. James's legal team pushed back, insisting that many of his holdings were independently acquired before the marriage. But the more they argued, the more evidence emerged that contradicted his version of events. The pressure weighed heavily on James, fueling late-night arguments with Vanessa in their penthouse suite. Though James never admitted it aloud, a small voice in the back of his mind questioned whether leaving Caroline so abruptly had been wise. Meanwhile, Caroline and Mark Stevenson worked tirelessly to piece together Vanessa's connections. They discovered that Thomas Carlyle was legally married to Vanessa. The bank transfers showed that James had unknowingly been depositing sums of money into an account managed by Vanessa and Thomas. On paper, these transactions appeared to be for consulting fees, but Mark's investigation revealed that no real consulting took place. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated scheme. Caroline wrestled with the dilemma of how to use this information. She wanted James to see the light that he had abandoned his wife for someone who had no qualms about using him. But she also had to be strategic. If she could present this evidence in court at the right time, it could shift the divorce settlement dramatically. Yet Caroline was torn between her desire for vindication and a lingering sadness over the ruin of her marriage. She couldn't help but remember the early days, when James's eyes sparkled with ambition, and how they once dreamed of traveling the world together. Those memories haunted her, fueling a mix of love and hate she couldn't fully reconcile. Late one evening, as she reviewed a new stack of documents, Caroline received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Olivia Pierce, the tabloid journalist who had been in contact with Vanessa. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest as she answered. Olivia, speaking in a hushed tone, revealed that Vanessa had been feeding her partial truths about James's finances. But Olivia suspected something bigger was at play. Vanessa's story kept changing, and Olivia's instincts told her that Vanessa was concealing crucial details. "I think she's trying to manipulate the press and the courts to her advantage," Olivia said, hinting that she had enough evidence to blow the story wide open. Caroline felt a strange camaraderie with this journalist she had never met. They were both circling the same enigma, trying to understand Vanessa Carter's endgame. Olivia proposed sharing information in exchange for an exclusive angle on the developing scandal. Caroline hesitated. Did she really want to fan these flames in the media? But the truth was, the more that came to light about Vanessa's double dealings, the better chance Caroline had of leveling the playing field against James and his legal powerhouse. She agreed to meet with Olivia in person to explore their options. As she ended the call, Caroline stared at the city lights shimmering outside her window. The lines between ally and adversary blurred in this high-stakes game. With each new revelation, she realized she was only scratching the surface of the deception that ran deeper than she ever imagined. At a discreet diner on the outskirts of Charleston, Caroline finally met Olivia Pierce. The journalist was in her early 30s, with sharp blue eyes and a notebook perpetually at hand. Over cups of coffee that quickly grew cold, Olivia laid out her suspicions. Vanessa had told her that James was a controlling partner, that she was nothing more than a scapegoat for his questionable business practices. Yet the financial documents Olivia had obtained told a different story, one where Vanessa stood to gain significantly, possibly even more than James himself. Caroline felt a sinking dread. This wasn't just about a mistress siphoning money. It hinted at orchestrated fraud, with Vanessa weaving a web of lies around multiple players. Olivia admitted she didn't have all the pieces, but she did have a trove of texts and emails hinting at Vanessa's communications with someone named TC. Caroline's heart leapt at the initials Thomas Carlyle. Vanessa's been playing James and TC off each other, Olivia mused, and I suspect she's been stoking the divorce for her own purposes. If Vanessa timed her revelations to the press perfectly, she could walk away with a massive payday from James, either in hush money or a settlement disguised as a marketing payout. Caroline decided to show Olivia the evidence Mark Stevenson had compiled, the damning bank transfers to T. Carlyle, the private investigator's photographs of Vanessa and Thomas in secret meetings, and the mysterious letters hinting that Vanessa was concealing more than just an affair. Olivia's eyes widened. The puzzle pieces fit together too neatly to be mere coincidence. If we go public with this, it could destroy Vanessa's credibility and, by extension, blow up James's claims in the divorce, Olivia said. But it'll be messy. That was an understatement. Caroline stood at a crossroads. She had spent the better part of her adult life supporting James, building a life she thought was grounded in mutual respect, only to be discarded when a more convenient partner came along. She felt a deep-seated urge for justice or perhaps vengeance. If she exposed Vanessa, James would be forced to confront the magnitude of his own betrayal. But there was no telling how that might influence the final settlement, or how the media frenzy might devour her own privacy. Still, Caroline found strength in the knowledge that she was not the one who had lied or schemed. She only wanted the truth. Before parting, Olivia handed Caroline a business card with a personal number scribbled on the back. "If you want to go on the record, call me," she said. Caroline nodded, grateful yet uneasy. She left the diner with a storm in her heart, uncertain of what her next move should be. That night, she paced in her living room, gazing at the framed photos of happier days with James. She wondered if exposing Vanessa would be a final severing of all ties, a point of no return that would erase any lingering sentiment she felt for her marriage. But perhaps that was precisely what she needed to end the chapter on a note of truth, no matter how painful, and find a path to reclaim her life from the wreckage. While Caroline wrestled with her moral quandary, James's life began to show the first real cracks. His real estate firm, Blackwood Enterprises, faced unexpected hiccups. A major investor pulled out of a lucrative development deal, citing unresolved legal complications. Rumors swirled that James's personal troubles were spilling into his business. To make matters worse, the tabloids had caught wind of his penthouse love nest and were questioning whether it was truly the fairy tale romance he and Vanessa portrayed. Vanessa, meanwhile, doubled down on her role as the doting partner in public. She organized a lavish fundraiser for James's new charitable venture, drumming up glowing press coverage. However, behind closed doors, their relationship grew tense. James sensed that Vanessa was hiding something. She would disappear for hours, return with a forced smile, and deflect his questions with vague excuses about client calls. In fleeting moments of introspection, James found himself missing Caroline, her straightforward warmth, the gentle way she would lay a hand on his shoulder, calming him after a stressful day. But he dismissed these thoughts as remnants of a past he'd already left behind. One afternoon, as James sat in his office scanning over land acquisition proposals, his secretary interrupted him. A man named Thomas Carlyle was in the lobby, insisting he had an urgent matter to discuss. James frowned. The name didn't register, but something about the man's persistence piqued his curiosity, and he agreed to see him. When Thomas stepped into the office, James was struck by the look of desperation in his eyes. Thomas introduced himself in a measured tone, though his voice trembled with suppressed anger. He told James he was Vanessa Carter's husband legally, on paper, a fact that no amount of spin could dismiss. James felt his world tilt. He stared at Thomas, trying to reconcile the words with the image. How was it possible that Vanessa could be married to someone else? The color drained from his face as Thomas revealed the entire story, how Vanessa had manipulated Thomas, stringing him along with promises that her relationship with James was just a short-term affair for financial gain. She needed capital, she claimed, to invest in a joint business venture that would eventually benefit both her and Thomas. Thomas provided proof, wedding certificates, text messages, and even letters from Vanessa promising him a share of the money once she secured enough from James. A storm of emotions raged inside James: anger, betrayal, humiliation. He felt the bitter irony of his situation. He had left his wife for a woman who was, herself, entangled in another marriage. Worse yet, he realized he might have been the pawn in Vanessa's grand plan. All his money, the lavish gifts, the marketing contracts, had it all been to line her pockets? Thomas revealed that he was done playing the quiet spouse. He wanted out of his toxic marriage and, in a twist, he offered James a proposition if James paid Thomas a substantial sum of money. Thomas would disappear and relinquish any claims he had to Vanessa's potential earnings from James's businesses. Essentially, Thomas was extorting James. But from where James stood, it seemed like a lifeline, an opportunity to remove this man from the equation and salvage what remained of his pride. As Thomas left, James sank into his leather chair, reeling from the revelation. The mistress he had chosen over the only woman who ever truly cared for him was at the center of a web of lies. And there, in the middle of it all, he was left with nothing but regret and the looming threat of a scandal that could cost him not just his marriage, but the empire he had spent his life building. In the wake of Thomas's visit, James confronted Vanessa. He couldn't contain his rage as he hurled accusations at her, brandishing the documents Thomas had given him. Vanessa played it off at first, claiming Thomas was just a bitter ex who refused to move on. But the evidence was undeniable: wedding papers, shared financial accounts, and text messages confirming their ongoing relationship. Cornered, Vanessa switched tactics, sobbing dramatically, claiming that she had no choice but to keep Thomas at bay with money because he was threatening her. She insisted that her love for James was genuine, that she never meant for him to find out this way. James felt torn, a tempest of fury and hurt swirling within him. He demanded she leave the penthouse immediately. Vanessa's tears turned cold in an instant. Her wounded expression hardened, and she warned James not to make rash decisions. "I know more about your finances than you realize," she said, her voice quiet but seething with menace. "If you think you can just cast me aside without consequences, you're sorely mistaken." In that moment, James realized the precarious position he was in. Vanessa had access to confidential information about his upcoming deals, his partnerships, and potentially damaging details that could harm his reputation if made public. The memory of Caroline's unwavering support stung him like a fresh wound. He had cast aside the one person who truly had his back for a woman who threatened to ruin him if she didn't get her way. When Vanessa finally gathered her things and left, James stood alone in the penthouse. The city lights flickered through the panoramic windows, mocking him. He thought back to the day he told Caroline he was leaving her. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality that sometimes the allure of something new can mask a darker agenda. For the first time, he felt genuine remorse for breaking Caroline's heart and for his own foolishness. That night, James's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer, alerting him to new motions filed by Caroline's legal team requesting a thorough forensic audit of his finances. Panic set in. He knew that this audit could also expose any dubious transactions made under Vanessa's guidance. Moreover, the media was starting to smell blood. Gossip columns were leaking details about Vanessa's sudden move out of James's penthouse, speculating that the new power couple was already on the rocks. Meanwhile, Caroline found a surprising sense of calm in the chaos. The revelations about Vanessa validated her instincts. James's mistress was not simply a woman in love, but a conniving manipulator. Caroline didn't revel in James's downfall, but she recognized it as the bitter fruit of his own choices. She kept in close contact with Mark Stevenson and Olivia Pierce, providing them with the materials they needed to expose the entire fiasco if necessary. Unbeknownst to all, Vanessa had not played her last card. She was meeting with lawyers of her own, plotting a strategy to come out on top, financially and reputationally. She had a trove of documents that could tarnish James's name and even implicate him in questionable business dealings. If she leveraged them correctly, she could still secure an enormous settlement, or at least blackmail her way into riches. In the shadows of Charleston's gleaming skyline, the final act of betrayal was about to unfold. The atmosphere in the Charleston courthouse crackled with tension when James, Caroline, and their respective legal teams convened for a major divorce hearing. Reporters hovered outside the tall wooden doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of the estranged couple. Rumors ran rampant. Would James attempt to reconcile? Had Caroline uncovered more of his shady dealings? Was Vanessa going to make an appearance, or would she remain a spectre looming over the proceedings? Caroline was nervous, yet she carried herself with quiet determination, wearing a tailored navy suit. By her side, Beatrice Langston stood poised, a calm but formidable presence who had orchestrated an airtight case against James's claims. On the opposite side of the courtroom, James appeared haggard. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and the once unshakable confidence he wore like armor had diminished into grim resolve. When the proceedings began, Caroline's team presented evidence of James's financial misconduct. Documents highlighted suspicious transfers, shell corporations, and accounts linked to Vanessa Carter. Although not illegal on their own, these transactions raised enough red flags to cast doubt on James's narrative of a fair and amicable separation. Tensions escalated when Caroline's lawyer questioned James on the stand, asking if he was aware that Vanessa Carter was legally married to another man during their affair. James's jaw tightened, and his gaze flickered to the spectators, aware that the entire room was witnessing his humiliation. A turning point came when a sudden commotion at the rear of the courtroom caused heads to turn. In strode Vanessa Carter, wearing a crisp blazer and pencil skirt, her posture impeccably straight. She marched forward, her own attorney trailing behind, and requested to address the court. Shock waves rippled through the gallery. No one had anticipated her appearance, least of all James. Vanessa began by presenting herself as a victim of circumstance, claiming that she had fallen in love with James while estranged from her husband, Thomas Carlyle. She admitted she kept her marriage a secret, but only because she feared Thomas's reaction. As she spoke, however, her tone shifted from self-pity to accusation. She alleged that James had pressured her into funneling money for tax purposes and that she was merely following his orders. She dropped hints of white-collar crimes, insinuating that James had used her to launder funds for shady deals. James erupted, calling Vanessa a liar. He insisted she orchestrated everything to siphon money from him, brandishing text messages that demonstrated her manipulative tactics. The courtroom devolved into pandemonium. Lawyers argued back and forth, the judge hounded by demands to either strike Vanessa's testimony or consider new evidence. In the midst of this chaos, Caroline sat, stunned at the spectacle unfolding before her. She realized that the man she had once loved was now tangled in an ever-widening net of deceit, fighting for his professional survival even more than his personal redemption. When the judge finally restored order, he ruled that more investigation was needed regarding the financial accusations. He announced a postponement of the ruling on the divorce settlement, giving both parties time to review the new allegations. A wave of exhaustion swept through Caroline. She had hoped this hearing would move her closer to closure. Instead, it ended in an explosive escalation, with Vanessa now threatening to bring James down alongside her if it suited her agenda. In the days that followed, the media had a field day dissecting every dramatic moment of the courthouse clash. Olivia Pierce's tabloid ran the headline, "Millionaire betrayed by Mistress, fraud allegations rock James Blackwood." Public opinion began to shift. Once seen as the archetypal wealthy philanderer who callously left his devoted wife, James was now painted as both a perpetrator and a possible victim of financial deceit. Caroline kept her distance from the swirling storm. She retreated to the modest home she grew up in, visiting her parents who still lived in Greenville. Sitting in her childhood bedroom, she gazed at old photographs, memories of simpler times. She felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that she was no longer trapped in James's web of ambition, heartbreak at how thoroughly their once promising love had deteriorated. Surrounded by her parents' quiet support, she took time to reflect on how she would move forward once the legal dust finally settled. Meanwhile, James was in free fall. Investors grew wary of his leadership. One by one, high-profile clients severed ties with Blackwood Enterprises, not wanting to be associated with scandal. Rumors circulated that James was liquidating assets to cover potential lawsuits, as well as to placate Vanessa and Thomas Carlyle, both of whom seemed eager to cash in on James's desperation. James scrambled to contain the damage, hiring a crisis management team and releasing carefully worded statements proclaiming his innocence. But the public was hungry for more salacious details, and no amount of polished PR could halt the speculation. Vanessa, ever calculating, saw an opening to leverage the chaos for her own benefit. If James was desperate, he might pay her handsomely to silence her allegations of financial impropriety, allegations that, whether true or not, could sink him. She arranged a covert meeting at a high-end restaurant, demanding a settlement so large it bordered on extortion. In return, she would sign a non-disclosure agreement about James's business practices. Cornered and furious, James agreed in principle, but insisted that she provide evidence that exonerated him from wrongdoing. They reached a tense stalemate, neither trusting the other enough to act first. While James struggled to juggle these ticking time bombs, a surprising ally emerged. Thomas Carlyle, newly emboldened, decided to meet privately with Caroline. He hoped to come clean about Vanessa's manipulations, to share any information that might strengthen Caroline's legal position against James, and by extension, cut off Vanessa's primary source of funding. They met in the same diner where Caroline had first spoken with Olivia Pierce. Over coffee, Thomas detailed how Vanessa bragged about taking James for a ride. She had told Thomas she would squeeze James dry, then disappear with the money. Thomas himself wanted only one thing: to be rid of Vanessa and the toxic marriage they shared. He saw Caroline as the only person who could stand up to Vanessa and James in court with enough moral high ground to come out on top. Caroline listened carefully, her emotions a mixture of empathy for Thomas's plight and deep disdain for Vanessa's cunning. She realized that in a twisted way, all of them, Caroline, Thomas, and James, had been Vanessa's pawns at one point or another. United by common betrayal, they forged a reluctant alliance. If they worked together to expose Vanessa's lies, perhaps they could free themselves from her manipulations once and for all. With the divorce hearing rescheduled for the following week, time was running out, and the stage was set for an explosive final confrontation that would decide the fate of everyone involved. On the day of the rescheduled divorce hearing, a hush settled over the courtroom as Caroline, James, and their assembled legal teams waited for the judge. This time, Thomas Carlyle sat in the gallery, a silent presence bearing witness to the final reckoning. Vanessa Carter was also there, eyes cold, her lawyer whispering instructions. The tension was palpable, like the quiet before a storm. The judge called the court to order, emphasizing the gravity of the allegations. Both sides were given the opportunity to present new evidence. Caroline's attorney began, methodically laying out the chain of bank transfers, linking Vanessa to Thomas Carlyle and tying them back to James's accounts. Screens displayed images of text messages and emails that Mark Stevenson's investigation had uncovered. Caroline sat with her eyes focused straight ahead, determined to see this through. Next, James's lawyer attempted to dismantle Vanessa's claims. He argued that Vanessa had manipulated James, forging documents and creating a narrative that painted him as complicit in financial fraud. A hush fell when James himself took the stand. Under oath, he admitted to leaving Caroline for Vanessa, but he also confessed that he had been blind to Vanessa's ulterior motives. He disavowed any wrongdoing in business dealings, blaming Vanessa for forging or doctoring certain records, an accusation that sent Vanessa into a fiery outburst. Security guards stood ready, anticipating the heated exchange. Vanessa then took the stand, her demeanor shifting from control to furious. She accused James of being the mastermind behind every shady transaction. Her attorney produced documents that cast doubt on James's innocence. The entire courtroom was caught in a volley of allegations and counter-allegations, each side hurling damaging evidence at the other. Observers whispered that this was more than a divorce hearing. It was a high-stakes showdown where no one would walk away unscathed. Then came the moment Thomas Carlyle stepped up, choosing to speak as a witness. Everyone watched in suspense, aware that Thomas's testimony could tilt the scales one way or another. He took the oath and proceeded to recount his conversations with Vanessa, revealing how she had planned to extort James from the start. Text messages he presented showed Vanessa bragging about milking James's fortune. She even explained her strategy in detail, how she would push Caroline into a bitter divorce, ensuring James stayed reliant on her marketing skills and locked in a cycle of guilt and secrecy. The revelation exploded like a firecracker. Vanessa's face blanched. She tried to interrupt, yelling that Thomas was lying. But the judge sternly called for order. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized. In a final blow, Caroline's attorney revealed that, thanks to Thomas's cooperation, they possessed timestamps and digital footprints, confirming that Vanessa, not James, had initiated many of the questionable financial transactions. What followed was a flurry of legal deliberations. The judge, appalled by the manipulative tapestry laid bare, ruled that the divorce settlement should heavily favor Caroline, given the emotional distress and financial risks James had subjected her to. As for Vanessa, she now faced potential lawsuits for fraud, among other charges. The judge made it clear that further criminal investigation might follow, and that no settlement with James would protect her from that scrutiny. In the aftermath, James sat in stunned silence. His empire lay in tatters, his reputation marred, and he was saddled with a gargantuan divorce payout. Caroline stood up from her seat, tears threatening to spill, but held at bay by relief. She glanced once more at James, feeling a strange pang of pity. In the end, they both lost something precious, but only one of them had a chance to rebuild without the burden of betrayal hanging over their head. Outside the courtroom, the flash of cameras greeted Caroline. She took a deep breath, grateful for the swirl of fresh air. Beatrice Langston gently guided her away from the throng of reporters. Nearby, Thomas stared at Vanessa, who glared back at him before storming off, her future uncertain. Quietly, Thomas nodded to Caroline, and they parted ways. Caroline exhaled, realizing the weight she had been carrying for so long was finally lifting. The world spun on, the sun shone overhead, and in that moment, the possibility of a new beginning felt more real than ever. In the end, James Blackwood learned a harsh lesson. In betraying Caroline for the illusion of something grander, he himself became the ultimate victim of deceit. Caroline, once cast aside, discovered her own strength and walked away not just with a fair settlement, but with the empowerment to forge a new path. Vanessa's secret, which she thought would be her golden ticket to fortune, proved to be her undoing, unmasking her as a cunning manipulator willing to betray anyone, including her own husband. Thomas, for a shot at wealth. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of love, betrayal, and redemption. If this dramatic story captivated you, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of human relationships. Your support helps us bring you more intriguing tales. Stay tuned for more jaw-dropping stories and see you in the next video.